That poor little girl was washing car windows just to buy milk. But when the billionaire saw her hands covered in cuts, he asked, "Who told you to do this?" And her answer left him speechless. That frosty morning in Chicago, David Lawson had only planned to grab breakfast for himself. Yet next to his silver BMW, a small girl stood shivering as she wiped the windshield, whispering, "I just want milk." Those words clawed open memories of his own abandoned childhood, and would soon uncover a secret the city had never known. The weak winter light struggled through the fog and biting wind. David Lawson, 46, was instantly recognizable in Chicago. Not just for his sharp navy suit, but for the steady presence of a billionaire real estate magnate. He stepped out of the corner store, a carton of milk in one hand, a bag of pastries in the other. Then he froze. Beside his gleaming BMW stood a girl, no older than 6. Her tangled dark hair framed a pale face worn by cold. A frayed green coat hung loose, riddled with holes, and her torn jeans offered no warmth. She used an old rag to wipe the car window, her movements slow, weak, almost collapsing under her own weight. She kept her eyes down, avoiding every passerby. David's breath caught. The sight dragged him back decades to a scrawny boy in a soaked shirt, shivering outside a rundown tavern, clutching a rag to earn a slice of bread. He steadied himself, walked forward, and crouched so his eyes met hers. "Who told you to do this?" His tone was calm, steady. The girl flinched, nearly dropping the rag. Wide brown eyes met his, fear flickering before giving way to exhaustion and fragile hope. "No one," she whispered. "I just wanted enough for some milk." The words pierced him like knives. Hunger, cold, despair, he knew them all. His grip tightened on the milk and pastries. He held them out. "Take this. You can eat now." She hesitated, then reached with trembling hands. "Where do you live? Where are your parents?" "My mom died. I stay with my stepdad, Carl. If I don't bring money, he says we don't eat." David's jaw set. He straightened, eyes hard. "All right," he said firmly. "I'll take you home. I'll speak to your stepfather." He opened the car door. The girl, Sophie, stared at him in disbelief before slowly climbing in. She eyed the plush leather seat with hesitation before slowly climbing in, clutching the carton of milk, the bag of bread, and her worn scarf. David shut the door, turned back to the store, handed the cashier a few bills, and said, "Keep the change." Moments later he slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and the BMW glided into the streets, carrying with it a new responsibility he hadn't expected. The drive took them through narrow blocks lined with sagging houses, tangled wires drooping overhead, and walls streaked with mildew. The air grew damp, heavier with every turn. Finally, the car rolled to a stop in front of a crumbling apartment building, its paint long faded, its windows staring blankly like empty sockets. David glanced at Sophie. She clutched a battered teddy bear, her small face pale. He didn't yet know that what he had done that morning would change 2 lives forever. He cut the engine, and silence pressed in, broken only by faint raindrops tapping the windshield. Sophie, still clutching the milk and bread, stared at the building with wide, frightened eyes. David placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. I'll go in with you." The damp air reeked of cigarettes, sewage, and rot as they stepped out. A single bulb flickered above the doorway, casting jittery shadows. Somewhere inside, muffled rock music throbbed, adding to the unease. They climbed the warped staircase, every step groaning under their weight. Closed doors lined each landing, blank and unwelcoming. At last, they stopped before 2B. The peeling paint and crooked number plates spoke of years of neglect. David drew a slow breath and knocked. The sound was nearly drowned out by the music. He knocked again, harder. A latch clicked, and the door creaked open. Carl Dawson stood there. His hair was greasy, his eyes bloodshot, and the stench of liquor hit instantly. He wore a stained T-shirt, his expression cold as his gaze locked on Sophie. "How much did you make today?" he growled, ignoring David entirely. David stepped forward, blocking Carl's view of the girl. "I'm David Lawson. I saw Sophie washing car windows. I think she's in trouble, and I'd like to talk about it." Carl sneered. "Trouble? If you're some billionaire looking to play hero, then fine. Give me $1,000. Call it back pay for raising her." He extended a rough hand. David's voice stayed level. "Children aren't for sale. If you can't take care of her, I'll be contacting Child Protective Services." Carl barked a laugh. "She's mine. You've got no say." He reached toward Sophie, but David blocked him, firm and unyielding. A quick glance past Carl revealed the truth. Piles of trash, beer bottles scattered across the floor, mold climbing the walls. In the center lay a filthy mattress. No toys, no blankets, nothing that belonged to a child. The smell of smoke and sour beer clung to the air, so thick David had to hold his breath. This wasn't a home, it was a trap. Carl's voice was low and sharp, his face twisted with rage. Get out. If you're some kind of sponsor or benefactor, hand over the money. Otherwise, get the hell out of my house. He shoved the door hard, slamming it in David's face. The metallic clatter of a lock turned over and over. David stood motionless, fists clenched, staring at the closed door. Sophie was still inside, still trapped in that hell. Anger and helplessness knotted in his chest. Forcing his way in would only make things worse legally. He needed a plan. From behind the door, an old scratchy rock song seeped into the hall. David turned to leave, but a faint voice drifted from behind him. An elderly woman, snow-white hair wrapped in a thick robe, leaned on the railing, her clouded eyes fixed on him. "If you really care," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves, "come back before it's too late. That little girl doesn't have much time left." That evening, the damp wind off Lake Michigan swept through the streets. David sat in his penthouse office, staring blankly at the contract on his desk. The image of apartment 2B and the neighbor's warning wouldn't leave his mind. The clock read 9:27. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to call it someone else's problem. But the memory of his own childhood, 10 years old, abandoned in a rotting house with a drunk father, gnawed at him. He couldn't shake it. He grabbed his coat and headed for the garage. His purpose was clear: return to that building, watch, and gather more information before deciding his next move. Rain misted the streets as he parked down the block from shabby apartments. He sat for a moment, staring at the shadowed building. The old woman's words echoed in his chest. Finally, he stepped out, climbed the damp stairs, and knocked softly at the door opposite 2B. It opened a crack. Warm light spilled into the dim hallway, revealing the lined face of the same elderly woman. "I know it's late," David said quietly, "but I need to know how Sophie is really living." She glanced both ways, then let him in. The small apartment was tidy, warm, scented faintly of herbal tea. She poured him a cup, her voice low. She hardly ever smiles since her mother died. It's like she lost her voice. "Carl, he doesn't work. Lives off her mother's benefits, sells junk, and makes the girl wash car windows. Now that the benefits are cut, he's drinking more, angrier." David held the cup for warmth as she went on, years of frustration spilling out. "She's only 5. I've seen her rummaging through the trash, searching for scraps. Once she brought home spoiled milk and said, 'Better than nothing.'" David's grip tightened on the handle. The stories ripped him back to his own past, the cold house, the empty plates, the liquor-stained nights. The woman stood, pointing to a corner where a small monitor flickered with the feed from a hallway camera. "I don't meddle," she said, "but that child doesn't deserve this." On the screen, the dim corridor outside 2B appeared. A moment later, Sophie stepped out, clutching a trash bag twice her size. Her size staggering as she dragged the trash bag down the stairs, Sophie disappeared into the shadows. David frowned. Moments later, she returned carrying a glass of water. She set it gently beside Carl, who lounged on the couch surrounded by empty beer cans and crumpled cigarette packs. Without glancing at her, he grabbed the glass, drained it, and slammed it down so hard water splashed onto the stained carpet. Sophie immediately dropped to her knees, wiping it up with her sleeve until the fabric soaked through. "He's used to it," the neighbor whispered, her voice low. "Carl doesn't hit him, but the coldness is worse. I've never once seen him ask if the boy had enough to eat." She paused, eyes flicking down the dim hallway. "I thought of calling Child Protective Services once. But everyone here knows Carl keeps company with the wrong sort. A man lost his job and his home just for crossing him. I'm afraid he'd retaliate, and the boy would suffer even more. So all I can do is watch from a distance." On the monitor, Sophie sat curled up on the couch again, knees tucked tight, clutching her ragged teddy bear. Her eyes stared blankly ahead, like she was searching for escape without ever moving from that spot. David leaned closer to the screen. Behind Carl, the refrigerator door hung ajar. Inside, only a few cans of beer, a nearly empty tub of margarine, and a pack of instant noodles. Not a trace of fresh food. Every detail cut into David like a silent blade. The garbage bags, the beer cans, her damp sleeve, all mirrors of his own childhood. "If you really want to help," the neighbor murmured, "be careful. Carl's friends aren't decent men." David gave a slight nod, eyes still fixed on Sophie's image. He didn't yet know how, but one thing was clear: walking away wasn't an option. The next morning, the gray sky hung heavy over the neighborhood. Though David had left the elderly woman's apartment hours ago, the images still haunted him. The shouting, Sophie shrinking back, the bruises, even that shadowy stranger with an envelope. Inside Unit 2B, the TV blared but couldn't drown out Carl's rage. Face flushed, beer clenched in his fist, he glared at Sophie. "What did you say to that guy, huh?" he spat, the air thick with liquor. "That man who drove you home yesterday. Did you tell him anything?" Sophie huddled in the corner, clutching her teddy bear. Her swollen eyes shed silent tears as she shook her head again and again, knowing words would only spark another storm. "If I hear you open your mouth again," Carl lunged, seizing her collar, lifting her small body off the floor. Her legs kicked helplessly. "You'll never see the light of day again, you hear me?" He released her. She stumbled back, clutching the bear to her chest, gasping. No sound escaped her lips. "Get in your room," Carl barked. She scrambled to her feet, legs trembling, and ran into the dark bedroom. The door slammed. A lock clicked cold and final as Carl's mocking laugh rose over the roar of the basketball game. Inside, Sophie slid down against the door, tears streaming down her cheeks. But she dared not make a sound. Meanwhile, miles away in downtown Chicago, David stepped into Samantha Lee's office. Outside, the blare of horns and the rush of the city pressed on, but inside the room tension hung thick. Samantha sat behind her desk, her face grave as she slid a steaming cup of coffee toward him. "We have a problem," she said flatly. She turned her laptop toward him. On the screen glowed a string of anonymous posts. Photos showed David standing with Sophie in the gas station lot, twisted by cruel captions. "Strange man approaches young girl. Watch out for predators in the suburbs. Pervert billionaire. Keep your kids away." The comments swarmed like vultures. David frowned, mind racing back. Then he remembered, after helping Sophie into the car, he noticed a man loitering in the corner of the lot, smoking, phone in hand. He hadn't bought anything, just watched. It had to be him. He'd taken those pictures and likely sent them to Carl. "Carl's making the first move," Samantha said coolly. "That neighbor's brother you confronted probably tipped him off. Don't be fooled. Carl may be a drunk, but he's scheming. He's on alert now." She leaned closer, her tone deliberate. "He knows you've seen too much. So he's using public opinion, painting you as the villain." Her words struck hard. "And if people believe it, you'll lose. Even in court." David tightened his grip on the mug, the rising steam doing nothing for the chill inside him. "I don't care about reputation," he said firmly. "I just need Sophie out of there. Whatever it takes." "Care," Samantha snapped, heat flashing in her voice. "Because this will be his weapon. If the public turns on you, the courts will too. And don't forget, Carl has connections. Smears are easy for him." David's chest nodded. His instincts told him Carl's problem wasn't only neglect, something deeper was at play. Something darker. But first, he had to make sure Sophie was safe. That afternoon, he returned to the corner where he had first met her, the spot where she usually sold pastries. He scanned the street, every alley, every stoop. But no small figure appeared. Unease rippled through him. By now, she was always there. He ducked into the little grocery store. The owner was stocking shelves, face tired. "I'm looking for the girl who sells pastries here." "Sophie," David said, keeping his voice even. The man sighed, shaking his head. "Since last night, Carl hasn't let her out. Haven't seen her today. He keeps her locked in like she's some kind of prize." David's chest sank. If she wasn't outside, she was in that house with him. As he left the shop, he spotted the homeless woman who often lingered at the corner. Sophie had shared pastries with her before. The old woman leaned against the wall, eyes dull. "Excuse me," David asked gently. "Have you seen Sophie, the girl who sells pastries?" The woman looked up, cloudy eyes meeting his. Her voice rasped. I haven't seen her since this morning." She hesitated, glancing around nervously. "But the last time she spoke to me, she was crying. She said, 'Carl's about to send me far away.' She was terrified." David staggered back. "Send her far away." The words struck his chest like lead. "Send her where? To whom?" Carl's voice on the phone, "I'll deliver her," and now Sophie's desperate warning. It all fit together in one chilling picture. By dusk, as streetlights flickered on, David was still parked in a shadowed corner, eyes locked on the building marked 2B. The fear inside him had hardened into something colder, heavier. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Want to know where she is tonight? Bring money." No name, no details. Just bait hanging in the dark. But David knew he couldn't ignore it. Sophie was in real danger. He didn't reply. Instead, he took a screenshot and sent it to Samantha. Minutes later, she called back, her voice urgent but steady. "Don't respond. This is proof he's holding Sophie hostage to extort money. I've already filed an emergency request with Child and Family Services. I submitted everything, the text, the neighbor's testimony, even those smear posts. It's approved. A social worker and a police officer will meet us there in an hour. Are you ready?" "I'm always ready," David said, his voice low and hard. An hour later, night cloaked the streets. A drizzle blurred the glow of the lamps. David's car sat parked near the building, still and watchful. Soon, an unmarked sedan rolled in behind him. Samantha stepped out, followed by a middle-aged woman in a long coat, her expression stern but calm. Mrs. Albright, a social worker from CFS, and a tall police officer with a silent, steady presence. "Mr. Lawson," Mrs. Albright greeted formally. "From this point on, let us handle it. You're here only as a witness. Don't speak unless asked." David nodded. Together they entered the damp stairwell, footsteps echoing up to the second floor. The officer knocked, firm and authoritative. Inside, the blaring rock music cut off. Silence followed. Then the door swung open. Carl stood there, bleary-eyed, irritated. His face twisted when he saw the group, especially David. "You again? Get out. This is private property," he snarled, shoving the door. The officer pressed a hand against it, voice flat. "Mr. Dawson, we have an emergency child welfare order from CFS. Interfering will only make this worse." Carl froze. His eyes flicked to the badge, then he spat a curse and backed away. The stench of liquor and mildew slammed into them as they entered. Bottles littered the floor, rotting food roared on the table. Mrs. Albright's sharp gaze swept the room, noting everything. David's eyes darted past the mess and found her. Sophie, curled in the corner, clutching her battered teddy bear like it was her last tether. Her eyes were hollow wide, a faint spark flaring when she saw him, only to vanish, replaced by raw fear as she glanced at Carl. Mrs. Albright crouched, voice gentle. "Hello, Sophie. I'm Mrs. Albright. I'm here to make sure you're safe. Are you hurt?" Sophie shook her head, hugging the bear tighter. Mrs. Albright carefully lifted her frayed sleeve. Beneath it, bruises in sickly yellow-green, fresh scratches cutting across fragile skin. That was when Samantha stepped forward, handing over a folder. "Here are the extortion messages, the smear posts against Mr. Lawson, and neighbor statements about Sophie being left without food. We believe this child is in a dangerous environment." Carl exploded, jabbing a finger at David. "That bastard's making this up. He's trying to kidnap my daughter." The police officer stepped forward, eyes locked on Carl. "Quiet, sir." Mrs. Albright ignored him, her gaze fixed on Sophie. "Sophie, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Tonight, where would you feel safe?" The room went silent. Sophie's tear-filled eyes darted between Carl, glowering with burning rage, and David, who stood quietly by the door, his eyes full of worry and hope. A battle played out in her gaze. Then, in a voice so faint it barely carried, she whispered, I want to go with him." The words struck like a verdict. Carl roared, lunging toward her. "You little!" Before he could touch her, the officer intercepted, twisting his arm behind his back. "You've crossed the line." Mrs. Albright rose, resolute. "The decision has been made. For the child's safety, we are executing the immediate removal order. She will be placed in emergency care." She turned to David. "After a preliminary check of your records and home, CFS is authorizing Sophie to stay with you temporarily." David exhaled, relief washing over him like a weight of stone lifting from his chest. He knelt before her. "Come on, let's go home." Hesitant at first, Sophie dropped the teddy bear and ran into his arms, burying her face in his coat. She didn't cry, but her trembling body betrayed everything. David carried her out, Carl's curses echoing behind them. In the hallway, the air felt cleaner. Samantha walked beside him, her voice low. "This is just the first round. The temporary placement lasts 72 hours. The emergency hearing, that's the real fight." That night, the penthouse, usually silent and immaculate, was pierced by muffled sobs. David jerked awake in the armchair, where he had kept watch. Sophie was curled under a cashmere blanket, her forehead damp with sweat, clutching the edge of the fabric as if someone might snatch it away. "No, don't," she murmured in her sleep. David knelt beside her, his chest tight. He had never comforted a child before. His voice was clumsy but steady. "It's all right, Sophie. I'm here. You're safe now." Her sobs eased, her body relaxing. Watching her, David realized Carl had left scars far deeper than bruises. The next morning, as required by CFS, he took her to a pediatric clinic. The white walls smelled of antiseptic, cold and sterile. Sophie clung to his hand, wary eyes following every stranger. Dr. Evans, a kind woman with a warm smile, bent down to her. "Hello, Sophie. I'm just going to take a quick look. It won't hurt, okay?" She weighed and measured her mild malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies. When the doctor brushed an old bruise on Sophie's arm, the child flinched. "How did you get this, sweetheart?" "I fell," Sophie muttered, eyes downcast. The words stabbed David. He had once said the same, hiding the welts of a belt. Dr. Evans laid a hand on his shoulder. "At least now someone's bringing her in. That's better than nothing." He nodded, throat tight. Better than nothing. But no child should have to survive on that. Next, a child psychologist played puzzles with her. Each loud sound in the hallway made her flinch. When his voice rose by accident, Sophie folded in on herself, arms wrapped around her chest. David's grip tightened on the chair, fighting the urge to intervene. By late morning, both the medical and psychological reports were complete. Dr. Evans handed David a copy, her voice low and serious. "The wounds inside will take much longer to heal. I'll send this directly to CFS and your attorney." Carrying Sophie outside, David felt her rest her head on his shoulder, weary but still whispering, "Uncle, the milk here tastes way better than the moldy bread at my old house." He froze mid-step. The words were light as a breeze, but they made him want to turn around and face Carl that very second. That afternoon, as they were coloring together, the phone rang. Samantha's voice came through, clipped with tension. "David, the report is strong, but Carl has filed for a supervised visit tomorrow afternoon." David's grip on the colored pencil tightened until his knuckles went white. He glanced at Sophie, focused on her drawing, and silently vowed, even if it was just one meeting, he would never let that man hurt her again. The visitation room at Child Protective Services was stripped of comfort. Plain beige walls, a wooden table, stiff plastic chairs, and a surveillance camera mounted high in the corner. No toys, no pictures. Just emptiness. David and Sophie arrived 10 minutes early. She wore the floral dress he had just bought her, but worry still clouded her eyes. She clung to his hand, her fingers icy. Mrs. Albright was already there, notebook in hand. "Right on time," she said. The door opened. Carl walked in. He had made a small effort, an old but clean button-down shirt, but the dark circles under his eyes and the flash of hatred when he saw David betrayed him. "Hi, Daddy's girl," Carl said with a crooked, false smile. Sophie pressed closer to David, her whole body rigid. "Good afternoon, Mr. Dawson," Mrs. Albright said firmly. As explained, this is a supervised visitation lasting 20 minutes. Mr. Lawson may remain as Sophie's temporary guardian, but will not interfere unless necessary. This is your time with her. David nodded, taking the seat beside Sophie, his hand wrapped around hers, offering quiet strength. Carl sat across, forcing a syrupy tone. "Sophie, come home with Dad. I miss you. Your room's still waiting." She shook her head, eyes glistening, hair falling across her face. The false sweetness cracked. Carl's voice sharpened. "What's the matter? That guy's been feeding you, dressing you nice, and now you forget who your real dad is?" "Mr. Dawson," Mrs. Albright warned, her pen poised. "Maintain appropriate conduct." But Carl ignored her, leaning forward, voice low and venomous. "Don't think you can get away from me. You hear? You're still mine. You'll always be mine." That was when Sophie's voice broke through. She snapped her head up, meeting his bloodshot glare with trembling courage. I don't want to go back there." Her voice shook, but was clear. "I don't want to." David's fists clenched, every muscle in his body tight with rage. He wanted nothing more than to pull her away. But he knew any impulsive move could be twisted in court. Her eyes found his pleading. All he could do was give a small nod, a silent promise. Mrs. Albright's pen moved swiftly, recording every word. Every threatening gesture. "Your 20 minutes are up. Mrs. Albright announced, her voice sharp and final. "The meeting is over." Carl shot to his feet, casting David a searing glare before storming out, the door slamming behind him. The moment it shut, Sophie broke down. The sobs she had fought to hold back burst out in gasping cries. David immediately gathered her in his arms, rubbing her trembling back gently. Mrs. Albright stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You did very well keeping your composure. Everything today will go into my report. He's only hurt his own case." By the time they reached the parking lot, David felt a small wave of relief. The evidence against Carl was clearer than ever. Sophie had already fallen asleep from exhaustion as he buckled her in, tears still streaking her cheeks. Just as he started the car, his phone buzzed. A new text appeared from an unknown number. "Be careful. He won't stop here." The words felt like a dark prophecy. David had underestimated Carl's brazenness and the reach of his connections. 3 days before the emergency hearing, the attacks erupted into public view. An online tabloid ran a headline screaming across the page, "Mystery of missing 5-year-old girl. Is a billionaire real estate mogul involved?" Written by an anonymous hack, the piece twisted truth into poison. It portrayed David as a predator who lured a poor girl into his luxury car. Fabricated quotes from supposed neighbors painted him as suspicious. The article stopped short of accusation, but planted doubt with surgical precision. A blurry photo of David and Sophie at the gas station accompanied it, and soon the smear spread like wildfire. Forums, parent groups, and local social media exploded with outrage. Rich people think they're untouchable. Somebody investigate this creep. You can see it in his eyes, he's shady. The backlash seeped into David's life. Business partners called with cautious voices. His building manager relayed complaints about a stranger in the complex. But the worst was Sophie. One night, as he read her a bedtime story, she looked up, her voice quivering. "Uncle, on TV they said you're a bad man. Are they going to make me go back to Uncle Carl?" David's chest tore open. Closing the book, he held her tightly. "No, Sophie, they don't know the truth. The truth is, I will always protect you. No one will take you away." But inside, he knew words alone weren't enough. He called Samantha, his voice steady. "We can't stay still anymore. He's painting me as a monster." "I know," Samantha replied, her tone icy. "And that's exactly what will turn around in court. But we need more than reports. We need voices, real witnesses." David thought of the kind elderly neighbor, the shopkeeper. They had seen Sophie suffering. This time he wouldn't go alone. With Samantha's guidance, a private investigator recorded official statements. The neighbor, at last unafraid, confessed with trembling voice, "That child deserves a different life. I've seen her left hungry, shouted at, too scared to smile." The shop owner confirmed Sophie often begged for noodles on credit, her frame thin, her face sad. Simple truths, but powerful. Samantha compiled everything, medical and psychological reports, notes from a supervised visit, the blackmail texts, witness statements, and even Carl's smear articles. The case file against him grew heavier by the day, a fortress of evidence built to withstand his lies. David decided to do something he had never done before, speak out publicly. He didn't hold a press conference or give interviews. Instead, he wrote a short post on his company's social media page, normally reserved for real estate updates. In life, sometimes we must stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. Protecting a child from harm is never wrong. The truth will always prevail. No attacks. No explanations. Just a firm stance. Almost immediately, support surged. Many began questioning the tabloids. Business partners and colleagues who knew David's integrity spoke out, defending him. The tide began to shift. That evening, relief softened the air. David and Sophie baked cookies together, the smell of butter and sugar filling the penthouse, replacing tension with warmth. When Sophie, her face and hands dusted with flour, smiled brightly, David knew he wasn't just fighting for her safety. He was teaching her never to bow to lies. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived at Samantha's office, an official court summons. Emergency hearing. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. The family courtroom was nothing like the ones in movies, smaller, softer lighting meant to ease the children brought within its walls. Yet to David, the air felt dense, almost suffocating. He sat straight in a crisp suit beside Samantha. Across the room, Carl fidgeted restlessly beside his attorney, a smug man radiating arrogance. Carl's eyes kept darting toward the door, where Sophie would be escorted in. Judge Williams entered, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, eyes sharp yet compassionate. She struck the gavel. The hearing began. Carl's attorney spoke first, weaving a fabricated story. He painted Carl as a grieving single father, struggling nobly after his wife's death. He accused David, a lonely billionaire, of becoming obsessed, unlawfully approaching Sophie, and using money to twist the truth. Tabloid articles were even submitted as evidence. David's fists tightened beneath the table, rage boiling. Samantha's hand on his arm reminded him, "Stay calm." When her turn came, Samantha didn't waste words on gossip. She rose, her voice steady, deliberate. "Your Honor, the opposing counsel has painted an emotional picture. But what it lacks is the truth. Today we will present that truth." One by one, she laid it out. Medical and psychological reports, charts of malnutrition, photos of bruises, documentation of trauma, flickered on the courtroom screen. Then came witnesses, the elderly neighbor, voice trembling but unwavering, recounting nights Sophie searched trash for food. The corner store owner confirmed she often came begging for instant noodles, thin and weary. Carl's attorney scoffed, dismissing them as biased busybodies. But the judge's face betrayed the seed of doubt growing into belief. Then Samantha produced the blow that could not be ignored, Carl's extortion texts, followed by an audio recording from a supervised visit. His own threatening words echoed through the courtroom, "You're still mine. You'll always be mine." Carl froze, his face draining of color. Finally, Judge Williams spoke. The court would like to hear from the child herself. The side door opened. Mrs. Albright gently led Sophie inside, Teddy Bear clutched tightly in her arms. Her wide eyes swept the unfamiliar room, but she never once looked at Carl. Instead, her gaze searched for David, and when she found him, it was as if she had found her anchor. Judge Williams smiled gently at Sophie, her voice softening. "Hello, Sophie. You don't need to be afraid. Just tell me the truth. Who do you want to live with?" For a long moment, Sophie was silent, her lips pressed tightly together. The entire courtroom held its breath. Then she drew a deep breath, her voice small but clear. I want to live with Uncle David." She paused, then added with firmer resolve, "I'm scared to go back there." Scared to go back. Those words landed like the final hammer blow, shattering Carl's lies. He made a move to rise and object, but Judge Williams lifted her hand, gaze stern. She reviewed the case file, silent moments stretching endlessly. Finally, she looked up and delivered her ruling. Based on the evidence, including medical and psychological reports, witness testimony, and most importantly the wishes of the child, the court finds that remaining with Mr. Carl Dawson would pose serious harm to her well-being. Therefore, the court orders Mr. Dawson's custodial rights are hereby temporarily revoked. Temporary custody for the next 90 days is awarded to Mr. David Lawson under supervision by Child and Family Services. During this time, Mr. Dawson's contact will be limited to one supervised visit per month at the CFS office. A quiet sigh of relief escaped from David and Samantha's side. Carl slumped back into his chair, pale as a ghost. Judge Williams turned to David. "Mr. Lawson, this is a tremendous responsibility. The court will be closely monitoring Sophie's progress." "I understand, Your Honor," David replied, voice thick with emotion. "I won't let the court down." As they left the courtroom, David carried Sophie in his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, a gesture of complete trust. The battle had been won, at least this round. But in the hallway, Samantha gently reminded him, the next 3 months will be the true test. You must prove you're not only rescuing her from hell, but giving her a home. The fight for permanent custody still lies ahead. The ruling felt like a fresh breeze sweeping away dark clouds that had shadowed their lives. Within a week, David's once silent penthouse had transformed into a true home. Crayon drawings were taped to the stainless steel refrigerator beside neatly pinned work calendars. In the living room, a soft play mat with scattered toys replaced a designer armchair. The warm, sweet scent of cookies baking often filled the air, pushing away the bitter aroma of black coffee. David's life had been turned upside down, yet he had never felt more complete. He learned how to braid a doll's hair, how to tell dinosaurs apart from picture books, and how to answer hundreds of why questions each day. He rearranged his work schedule, canceling meetings so he could take Sophie to the park after school. A few days after the ruling, he brought her to a new preschool. At first, she clung to his leg, shy and unwilling to let go. But the teachers, already briefed on her situation, were patient and kind. Gradually, Sophie began to open up. Through the classroom window, David watched her take another child's hand for the first time, smiling as they built towers of blocks. That afternoon, the teacher greeted him warmly. She had such a bright smile today. Sophie's nightmares came less often now. The muffled sobs of midnight were replaced with steady, peaceful breathing. She no longer startled at sudden noises and instead began exploring every corner of her new home, curious, brave, and free. One evening, as they sat on the floor coloring together, Sophie suddenly looked up at David, her clear eyes fixed on him. "Uncle David," she asked. "What is it, Princess?" he replied, still shading the Tyrannosaurus Rex. "This is my home now, isn't it?" David paused, meeting her gaze. He set down the pencil, knelt, and wrapped his arms around her small shoulders. "Yes, this is our home, and it always will be." Sophie's face lit up with a cloudless smile. She picked up the picture she had been coloring, a house with a chimney puffing smoke, a sun beaming overhead, and two figures, one big and one small, holding hands. She handed it to him. "It's for you. This is our home. Yours and mine." David's throat tightened as he placed the drawing in the most prominent spot on the refrigerator. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, he stood at the window, staring at the glittering Chicago skyline. He thought of his own childhood, alone, hungry, wishing for a hand to pull him to safety. Now he had become that hand. The cycle of pain was broken. The legal fight wasn't finished. In 3 months, they would return to court for permanent custody. But fear no longer gripped him. Watching Sophie's peaceful face, he knew he had the strength. He whispered a promise to her and to the lonely boy he once was, "As long as I'm breathing, you'll always have milk to drink and a place to call home." 3 months later, the final hearing came on a crisp spring morning. Sunlight poured through the tall courthouse windows like a blessing. The room felt different this time. Not tense, but waiting. Carl slouched at the defendant's table, thinner, his arrogance gone. Losing Emma's benefits and facing charges of neglect had hollowed him. His attorney tried weak defenses, but they crumbled under the weight of evidence, photos, medical records, testimony, and glowing reports from Child and Family Services. Those reports told of transformation. Sophie, once timid and silent, now entered preschool with a smile. She raised her hand in class, made friends, and laughed freely. A psychologist confirmed she was learning to trust, to feel safe again. Judge Williams adjusted her glasses, her voice calm but firm. "Carl Dawson is hereby stripped of all parental rights. Full and permanent custody of Sophie Dawson is granted to David Lawson." There was no outburst, no gasp, just David's long exhale, months of tension leaving his chest. He turned to Sophie, sitting beside him in her yellow dress. She didn't fully grasp the legal meaning, but she felt it. "It's done," he whispered, pulling her close. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. The legal war was over, but for David, this was only the beginning. A beginning defined not by walls or wealth, but by safety, trust, and love. Their story hadn't started in a courtroom. It began months earlier, on a brittle winter morning, with a small voice saying, "I just want milk." That whisper wasn't about milk alone. It was the cry of a soul starved for love, desperate to belong. And David chose to step closer. That choice grew into a promise, and that promise became a family. This story reminds us, kindness doesn't always come in grand gestures. Often it's the courage to pause, to truly see another's pain, and to act. Yes, the world has cruelty, men like Carl who take more than they give. But the world also holds light. Light from a stranger who cares. From a neighbor who notices. From a shop owner who gives without asking. From a public servant who refuses to look away. Each act of kindness is a brick in the wall that shelters the vulnerable. And when enough bricks are laid, they form something unshakable, a home. Never underestimate the power of a caring gesture, a gentle word, or even a glass of milk. Sometimes those smallest things ignite the greatest change. Family, at its core, is simply where the heart finds its home. Which moment in Sophie's story touched you the most, and why? If you were David, would you have done the same? Share your thoughts with us in the comments.